It's embarrassing to admit, but I was always looking for those things you just can't bring yourself to believe in. My dad told me they were real. He told me a lot of things, and all of them stuck with me. Whenever something odd would happen, or when the details just didn't sync up, I knew what was going on. I knew that one of nature's secrets was involved, somehow. Unfortunately for me, this particular secret landed me in an emergency room. After that, I spent more time in hospitals than I care to admit. It changed my life. For the better or for the worse, I can't be sure. I'm different now, I know that, but I also know the truth. I know that my dad was right. I can prove it if you let me. Unfortunately, no one ever wants to give me the time. I've hungered down in local bars and wandered up and down Bourbon Street, looking for an ear that's keen to listen to the truth. I've found the precious. Now, while I still have the chance, I figure I should tell as many people as I can. What better way to do that than share my story in this way? We had some disappearances in the swamps, more than normal. Experienced men and women going out to do their business, wandering right off the map. Different stories came out for each individual. The police always had something clever to say. There was never any reason to be alarmed. After the fifth one, I was alarmed. More than alarmed, I'd say. I was panicked because I knew what was taking those people. My dad used to tell me a story about the beast in the swamps. I believed him when others wouldn't, as I'm sure you could guess. He said that monster liked to take people. If I knew what it was, I wasn't going to let it keep taking. I went out with a gun and a camera. I was going to shoot it one way or another, bring back proof of the thing's existence. Then we'd see what clever words the police had to say. My old boat wasn't much, but it was sturdy enough to navigate the swamps. I knew where a few islands of mud were hidden in the water. A creature would have to be living there, I figured. So I started to check them, one after another. You'd think someone would have stopped me. Cops would have marked the area as dangerous or something, turned me back around, but no one was out there. There wasn't a strand of tape that I had to cross. I guess if they were posted in the swamp, protecting us from that thing, they'd have to stop lying about the disappearances. On the third island, I found it. Sometimes I wish that I hadn't. The earth there was higher than the others, drier and covered in reeds. When I approached, I cut the engine to my boat, drifted onto shore. I saw something dark duck into the brush. It was my lucky day. I had the camera strapped around my neck and the gun in my hand. Barrel first, I thought. Lens second. There was a chance, I knew, that I'd just come upon a cat or a dog. Something unremarkable. I learned quickly that wasn't the case. A roar came out of those reeds. A roar, then a tantrum. The grass split, and then the large shape came rushing towards me, screaming and howling. I fired the gun, tripped, landed on my camera. It's convenient, I know, but that's the way it happened. Inconvenient was the way that the creature grabbed my leg. I felt its thick fingers wrap around my calf, one digit at a time. I remember thinking its grip was tight. Then it pulled me into the reeds. It yanked me so hard that I thought my leg might be torn from my hip. I remember my back scraping against the brush and the rocks. I remember the mud seeping into my clothes. It pulled and it twisted. It screamed, and it threw me. I rolled across the dirt island until my body landed half submerged in the swamp. My father hadn't warned me about something like this. Suddenly, I felt stupid. Had I really come out here to play hero? Was I planning to bring those missing people back home? I propped myself onto my arms and looked up. Finally, got a good look at the monster while it ran toward me. Broad shoulders, probably 8 foot tall if it stood up straight. Long-limbed, thin, but shaped out of tight muscle, covered in a thin fur. I hate how human its face appeared to be. If I hadn't already felt its strength, I could have mistaken it for a man. I lifted my gun again, somehow, still in my hands, and fired a second shot. I think I missed. Whether I hit it or not, the gun was persuasive in a way that I couldn't be. The creature fled, disappeared into the swamp. It took me an hour to crawl back to my boat. The secret I learned that day was painful. When I tried to share it, the local police and the papers called me a madman. It took a long time for my leg to heal. It took even longer for me to learn that shutting up about the beast would be my quickest way out of the hospital. The more I said, the more they insisted that I was out of my mind. I walk with a limp now. When I walk up and down Bourbon Street, it's slow. That hiccup in my gait didn't come from nowhere, you know. It came from something real. It came from something that only my family and a few others truly believe in. Something no one wants you to know about. Now, at least, you have the option. You get to tell me, do you believe me or not? There used to be a lot of kids in this neighborhood. I know, because I was one of them. Like me, those kids grew up. They didn't get into law enforcement like I did, but they did all carve out their paths in life, grew old, or moved away. Those kids aren't the ones who are missing. It's today's kids, the ones who shouldn't be, but just are. It's a weird detail to share up front, but adults in this area have had a tough time having children. I think it's related to our local water, or the incident at the soy factory 2 generations ago. I don't know the truth. I haven't solved that case. Still, just because the born and raised aren't having their own children here, that doesn't mean the streets should be so absent of youth. The kids that move here from the outside of the city all seem to encounter the same bad luck. There's a crisis or a tragedy. Maybe the family moves back from where they came from, or the kid just up and runs away. Maybe worse. It's always something. A few years ago, I thought I was making a break in our small town mystery. I thought I found the kids, or at least what I thought was causing them so much trouble. I was wrong. It was something else, and it wasn't being found by me. I was being found by it. The department had received a tip about a boy that had supposedly run away from home. Rumor was that he fled to the area with his father. Whoever called us insisted that they had seen the boy sneaking into an old factory on the edge of town. They used to make glass there. They don't make anything there anymore. The place went under not long after the soy company. While the soy building was renovated, this one was left to rot. Bones of steel and rust, hardly a place for a kid. I followed that tip as far as I could. There were signs of people living there, small shoe prints in the dust on the floor. I called it in, didn't find anything, but I kept looking. I kept coming back. There was a basement nobody knew about. The entrance was hidden by a collapsed catwalk. I wouldn't have looked at it twice if it wasn't for the voices I heard on the other side of the buried door. Children's voices calling out to me. I called it in. Again, I didn't do much without letting my peers know. It wasn't making sense. The debris between myself and the basement door had clearly been there for years. No one could have been back there, but I wasn't going to make them wait. I pushed aside what pieces I could. The fire department would be there soon. I just needed to get my hands on the door. I needed to open it just a crack. I managed exactly that. When I did, the basement beyond let out a loud gasp of dead and dry air. It ripped the oxygen right out of my lungs. It was just a crack. It was enough. The voices stopped suddenly. I called out, asking where they'd run off to. I reminded them that everything was fine and that help was on the way. It took my eyes a moment to adjust to the darkness on the other side of the cracked door. Most of it was shadows and eyeballs. Little blinking black eyes. The heads of a half a dozen pelt children, all tilted at me, like owls caught nesting in a barn. They blinked and they frowned. I cursed, scurried back, and practically collided with the chest of the fire chief. I told them what I saw. They got to digging as quickly as they could. There were no kids, of course. Whatever I heard and saw, it wasn't down there. Apparently, they claimed whoever had called it in was just as crazy as I was. There was no life in that factory. I tried to tell myself the same thing. I couldn't escape the feeling that there had been something there. We had let it out by accident. We started getting lots of calls after that. A few people around town were reporting hearing children's voices in their yards at night without any kids in the neighborhood. It's easy to understand why that might have been alarming. We looked. Footprints again, but no kids. None that we could get our eyes on. It was stupid of me, but after a few weeks, I worked up the nerve to go back. I wanted to check out that basement myself. I ducked into the factory, wedged my way through the clearing that the fire department had made. I sunk into the shadows of the basement like it was a pool on a hot summer day. It was cold like water, heavy too. I swam and I searched for some kind of answer. Down there, they saw me again, the blinking black eyes, catching the beam of my flashlight, the deep-set frowns. I felt like I had intruded on their little clubhouse, the kids that didn't exist. When I reached for one, they pulled away. They shrieked, and something about the darkness grew heavier. The shadows seemed to grow, and I felt immediately small. I may have been a kid myself. I ran. I waited outside for the sun to come up. I waited to see if any of the kids followed. They didn't. Subsequent searches didn't turn up a thing. No one went back into that basement after the official investigation was concluded. The factory was sealed up, legitimately this time. And now I, like the rest of the adults in this town, have been left to wonder, why are there no children here? What are the things we can hear and see in the dark, pretending to be our kids? When I was a kid, I went to study abroad in London for a little while. It was a life-changing experience. I got a job at a pub that turned out to be incredibly haunted. When I first started working there, it seemed like a typical English pub in a small town, with some local regulars, and was pretty much what you would expect. I got to meet a bunch of cute English singles, and it was honestly a blast to work at. But there was definitely a peculiar feel to the place. There was a family that lived above the pub, and they used to share some of the craziest paranormal experiences with the patrons of the pub. They had supposedly been living in the building for generations and had seen and heard some unexplainable things. It seemed like every day they had a new story about hearing footsteps and whispering voices in the night, seeing apparitions of figures walking through walls, and feeling the sensation of being touched by something unseen. They even spoke about objects moving on their own, doors opening and closing by themselves, and seeing ghostly figures that would appear in the middle of the night. It was as if the building had a life of its own, and the family that lived there had accepted that as part of their everyday life. As these stories of the paranormal encounters spread throughout the pub, people began to wonder if the family's experiences were just urban legends, or if there was something truly supernatural going on. But for the family, it was just another day in their haunted home above the pub. There was supposedly a woman who had died at the bar years ago, and there was also supposed to be a ghost that inhabited the cellar downstairs. I laughed it all off at first and thought it was just straight up nonsense, but I quickly began to experience some terrifying things for myself. One of the scariest experiences I had was down in that creepy cellar. I was down there collecting bottles to refill the fridges upstairs when suddenly the lights went out and the laundry door slammed shut behind me. I freaking froze in fear. And then I heard these really heavy footsteps coming up behind me. It sounded like a large man, and his breathing was so loud that it felt like it was right behind my ear. I was in shock, and I just braced for impact. As soon as the footsteps stopped, the lights came back on, and there was nobody there. For the longest time, I refused to go down there, but the owner of the place pretty much forced me to, and said if I wanted a job there, I had to go. Being in a foreign country and desperately needing the money, I went down there when he asked, but I never stayed down there long. After that happened to me, I just couldn't shake off the feeling, like something did not want me down there, and I felt it every single time I got close to the cellar. It was like the air was thick with heavy energy, and I just wanted to get the hell out of there as quickly as possible. One of my coworkers told me that the cellar had been used to perform surgeries way back in the day. At the time, I figured the less I knew, the better. But now, I wish I had done more digging around. I talked to the family that lived there, and they told me the only way to protect myself was to confront the ghost and tell it that I had every right to be there. It sounded freaking nuts to me, but I was desperate for that thing to stop attacking me. So I decided to give it a try. Despite my fear, I went down there again, took a deep breath, and mustered up all of my courage. I stood in the middle of that dank, creepy cellar and pretty much shouted at the top of my lungs, I have every right to be here. And if I'm being 100% honest, it freaking worked. The negative heaviness in the room went away, and I didn't feel like I was being watched as much. From then on, I continued to work down in the cellar, even though I was still a bit uneasy. But every time I went down there, I made sure to say out loud that I had a right to be there. It might sound crazy, but it actually worked for me. I don't know what kind of energy or entity I encountered down there, but I'm just grateful that I found a way to protect myself from it. And then, right before I left London to come back home to the States, this hysterical woman in old-fashioned clothing suddenly burst into the pub. She was screaming and crying for help. She was frantic and was definitely running away from something. Before anyone would try to calm her down or offer assistance, she ran right through the freaking wall. It was one of the most bizarre things I have ever witnessed. Everyone in the pub was stunned and just stood there in shock, trying to make sense of what had just happened. It's strange how some of the places just seem to hold more paranormal energy than others, and this pub was definitely one of them. I had heard all kinds of stories from the family that lived above the pub, who had experienced all sorts of strange and unexplainable events. But that one took the freaking cake. The lady who ran through the wall and the ghost who tried to dominate me in the cellar are probably the craziest things I'll ever experience in my lifetime. It was a very strange feeling to leave that place. The person who arrived in London was a very different person